Okay, a little recap of the things that occurred here in the lab today. So a third rinse was run. Here was our first rinse after the EDTA soaked in, and again, a reminder, this was conductivity versus time. Initially, this was the conductivity due to the concentration of EDTA. As the activated carbon was soaked in it, the concentration went down. Again, 25 minutes seemed to be about the time, and that's what we saw with our assay. So those are two good, strong pieces of evidence to suggest that the activated carbon is binding the EDTA. Then when we rinsed the EDTA in, or when we rinsed the activated carbon in water, then we saw this much conductivity be released. Now, I don't know if this is an indication that the EDTA is, most of it's being released or what. We talked about how the amount of EDTA, amount of conductivity is more than was absorbed. This was the second rinse. The red line here was a third rinse, and then we started a fourth rinse again. The fourth rinse was a little bit less than the third rinse, but it was about 10% less there. But there's just constantly material coming off. After this rinsing, which is a constantly stirring like this, right? So we have activated carbon with EDTA on it, constantly stirring in water. This material up here, this supernatant, becomes black, right? We centrifuged it again, ran it in the centrifuge again this time, and couldn't centrifuge the material down, so the material is very light. It's not, I don't know exactly what it is. It's probably little tiny particulates of carbon for sure. Whether it has EDTA on the outside, I don't know. But that caused me to think, well, what happens if you just take regular activated carbon without EDTA and do a conductivity experiment like this? And so that's what is occurring right now. And the amount of material that is being released in this one here, after 1 minute, our conductivity was 132, compared to our fourth rinse of EDTA activated carbon after 1 minute being 16.9. So this is, again, no EDTA, activated carbon, no EDTA, and we're still seeing a significant amount of material, conductivity being released in these washes. So I had rinsed this activated carbon off 5 or 6 times so that the amount of black material was minimized. Again, no EDTA involved here, but maybe this is what needs to happen first. First, we need to get the conductivity to an extremely low level, like these washes over here, and then possibly bind EDTA to it. So I'm going to finish up this activated carbon, no EDTA rinse, and keep rinsing this 3 or 4 times until, again, the rinses minimize the amount of conductivity that's released. I also tasted this activated carbon, no EDTA, and it tastes that metallic flavor as if the activated carbon itself is what's kind of causing that funny taste. So we know that when EDTA is soaked onto the activated carbon, we get more black, in your case more yellow, being removed. Again, the EDTA is on the activated carbon or soaked into it, and more yellow and black material keeps coming off. And that could be one of the contributors, at least, to the flavor, the taste of the water. So I wouldn't be tasting this stuff. It's probably just small particulates of activated carbon, but we don't want to have that in us. Okay, so we also took our pump here, and we tried to take 2.5 millimolar copper sulfate. So here's 2.5 millimolar copper ion, which we tried to filter this. Last time we tried to filter this through this pump, and it didn't seem to absorb anything. This time, we pumped some EDTA through this and let it soak on there for about 10 minutes, and then rinsed it with water, and then put 2.5 millimolar copper sulfate on there. And we can go look and see the results of that over here. This was the copper sample before the filter, and this represents all the copper material, the different copper species bound to the EDTA in our assay to determine how much copper there is. So we get an area under the curve at 280 nanometers absorption of 3,530. And now if we look after the copper filter and take the area under the curve here, we get 2,829. So maybe a small amount of copper was absorbed due to the EDTA that was on that activated carbon in that filter. But as you know, because of our previous experiments with different sizes of EDTA, or sorry, different sizes of activated carbon, this activated carbon that's in this filter might not absorb the EDTA really well, and so we might find that I would say that this is a significant decrease from 35 to 28. 35, that was the other one, right? Double check here again. $34 to $28. All right, so that's a decrease of copper that got through. But I would think that we might need to allow that copper, that activated carbon material, to bind more EDTA. But I think it's more likely that that activated carbon in that filter just isn't going to be binding our EDTA really well at all. So we have to get a little creative. I think we're ready to cut open this filter here and check out what's inside, and maybe create our own little device that has room, space for activated carbon, our activated carbon with our activated carbon EDTA mixture together. We did monitor the conductivity of the EDTA before we bound it to the activated carbon in here, and afterwards. Unfortunately, like before, when we deal with these types of filters, there's always some saturation and some water that kind of remains in here. You can't always get it out. And I think what happened was that there was some, from my first time I used it to see if it would bind any 2.5 millimolar copper, I feel like there's some in here still. And so when we ran the EDTA through, some of that came out and actually increased the conductivity of the solution. So it's hard to say exactly that any EDTA was bound because the conductivity, we're using the conductivity. So, all right, so a lot of variables still left, but I think right now, again, the first thing we need to do is look at this activated carbon being washed and try to get that conductivity as low as possible, and then let it bind to EDTA and see if that conductivity could be an indication of how much EDTA is bound, if it stays with it. Okay, hope that helps.